The galaxy knew them as the undefeated. For centuries, their armies had marched across the stars, leaving only ruins behind. No fortress had ever stopped them. No weapon had ever slowed them. Wherever their banners rose, entire civilizations fell to their knees. They called themselves conquerors, but others whispered the truth: they were destroyers. Their war fleets were endless, blackening the skies of every world they entered. Soldiers of other races trembled at the sound of their drums. Entire planets surrendered without a fight, knowing resistance only brought death. Children grew up hearing stories of their victories, stories meant to scare them into obedience. "Do not cross them," parents said. "Do not fight them. No one survives." On the battlefield, their commanders stood tall, proud of their unbroken chain of victories. They wore trophies from fallen races on their armor: bones, metal shards, and torn banners. To them, war was not survival. War was sport. They fought not because they had to, but because they could. And no one challenged them. When they arrived, most worlds bent the knee. Those that tried to resist were erased from maps. Their history, their songs, their very names, all burned away. They had ruled like this for so long that even the stars seemed to bow to them. They laughed when new rumors reached their ears. Tiny, fragile humans, it was said, were preparing to fight. The thought made them roar with amusement. Humans, they mocked, were latecomers to the galaxy. Their ships were small, their weapons outdated, their bodies weak. How could a race like that stand against the undefeated? Still, the whispers would not stop. Something strange was said to follow the humans. Something hidden. Something no one had seen clearly. A beast, a monster, a creature born of their world. The soldiers laughed harder. Beasts. Monsters. They had destroyed entire species known for their strength. They had crushed war machines bigger than cities. A single creature could never stand against them. "Bring it," their generals said. "We will make it our pet." But there were some who did not laugh. In the shadows of the great army, younger soldiers whispered to each other. They spoke of the silence of human camps, how their armies did not sing or boast like others. They spoke of the strange cage humans carried, heavy and sealed with thick chains. No one knew what was inside, but even from a distance, they said, they could hear something. A low sound. Like thunder beneath the earth. Still, the undefeated remained certain. Victory was a law, and they had never broken it. Their fleets gathered above a new world, black ships blotting out the sun. Their banners flew high as they landed on the surface, confident as ever. They marched across the plains, weapons gleaming, armor shining. The ground shook beneath their boots. They looked like a tide of iron, an unstoppable flood ready to drown another victim. The battlefield stretched wide, surrounded by mountains. On one side stood the undefeated, millions of soldiers, armed and roaring. On the other stood humanity, far smaller in number. Their camp was silent, their banners still. No war drums beat for them. No soldiers raised their voices in song. Instead, they waited. Calm. Patient. In the center of the human camp, a massive object stood, covered in steel and chains. It was not a weapon. It was not a machine. It was a cage. The soldiers of the undefeated pointed and laughed. They thought it was a trick, a desperate attempt to frighten them. They jeered, shouting across the battlefield. "Is this your great weapon, humans? A box? A toy?" The humans did not answer. They stood like statues, watching quietly, as if they already knew what was coming. As the alien commanders prepared their troops, some began to feel unease. The cage, it moved. Not much, not enough to see clearly, but enough that the ground beneath it seemed to shiver. The chains clinked softly, metal against metal. At first, the undefeated soldiers ignored it. But then came the sound. A low, deep growl rolled across the battlefield. It was not the sound of any machine. It was not the cry of any beast they knew. It was older, heavier, like the earth itself was growling. It sank into their bones, made their weapons feel cold in their hands. The laughter faded. The growl turned into a rumble, louder now, shaking the cage. Dust rose from the ground. Soldiers looked at each other nervously. For the first time in centuries, they felt something new on the battlefield: uncertainty. The commanders shouted for discipline. "Stand firm," they barked. "It is nothing but a trick." But their own voices cracked slightly, betraying the doubt in their hearts. The humans did not move. They only whispered among themselves. Quiet words that carried across the silence, "It is time." The alien army stood ready, but their confidence had begun to crack. They had always believed themselves untouchable. They had always believed nothing could stand before them. But now, staring at that shaking cage, they began to wonder. What could the humans be hiding? What kind of creature growled like that? And why? Why did the humans look so calm, as if victory was already theirs? The growl rose again, louder than before. Soldiers tightened their grips on their weapons. Some shifted uneasily, glancing toward their commanders. The air itself felt heavy, thick with tension. The battlefield, once filled with laughter, fell into silence. Only the humans stood steady. Their faces unreadable. Their eyes sharp. The soldiers of the undefeated army did not know it yet, but for the first time in their history, they were afraid. The battlefield was ready long before the first shot was fired. Alien banners stretched high, their colors bold against the pale sky. War drums thundered across the plains, each beat heavy with the promise of victory. Their commanders rode at the front, shouting words of triumph to their soldiers, reminding them of their long chain of victories. To them, this day was nothing but another step in their endless march. Another world to claim. Another name to erase. On the opposite side, the humans waited. They did not sing. They did not cheer. Their camp was quiet, almost too quiet. Soldiers stood in rows, still as stone, their eyes fixed on the horizon. They did not raise their voices or wave their weapons. Instead, they stood with a strange patience, as though they knew something the others did not. At the very center of the human camp stood the object everyone had been whispering about. A massive cage, forged of black steel, its surface covered with thick chains that gleamed in the morning light. The cage was larger than a tank, heavy enough that the ground beneath it sank slightly. The alien soldiers pointed at it, laughing loudly, their voices rolling across the field. "Is this what you bring to face us?" "A box," one shouted. Another waved his weapon high. "What will you do, humans? Hide inside it when we come for you." Their laughter spread, growing stronger with every insult. The idea that a cage could be their enemy was too ridiculous to take seriously. Yet the humans gave no reply. They stood unmoving, their expressions calm, their silence unbroken. They did not defend themselves against the mockery. They did not shout back. They simply waited, as though the words of the undefeated meant nothing. Some of the alien soldiers began to frown. From where they stood, they could see the cage shift, just a little. At first they thought it was the wind, or a trick of the light. But then it moved again, stronger this time. The thick chains rattled softly, clinking against the steel bars. The laughter weakened. A sound drifted across the field, faint but unmistakable. A low growl. It was deep, far deeper than any animal they had ever heard. It did not sound like a creature of flesh and blood. It sounded older, heavier, like something born from the heart of the earth. The alien soldiers who stood closest to the front shifted uneasily. Some tightened their grips on their weapons. Others glanced at their commanders, waiting for reassurance. But the commanders, though proud and tall, had also heard it. Their voices grew harsher as they barked orders, their faces showing just a trace of unease. The cage shook again, harder this time, as though something inside pressed against the bars. Dust rose from the ground beneath it. The growl turned into a rumble that vibrated through the air. It was not the roar of a machine. It was alive. It was hungry. And still, the humans said nothing. The undefeated army, who had crushed countless worlds without fear, now found themselves unsettled. They had mocked. They had laughed. But now silence hung over them, broken only by the chains rattling in the wind and the low thunder of the thing hidden inside. The human commander stepped forward. He raised his hand, not to speak to his enemy, but to signal his own troops. The human soldiers shifted their stance, calm and ready. Their faces did not carry fear. Their eyes did not show doubt. They looked like men and women who had already accepted the outcome of this battle. The alien commanders raised their weapons and shouted for their troops to prepare. Voices rose, War cries filled the air, but it no longer sounded the same. Beneath the shouting was hesitation, beneath the anger was doubt. For the first time in living memory, their perfect chain of victories felt fragile. What could be inside that cage? Why did it feel so heavy, so wrong, to stand before it? And why did the humans look as if they already knew how this would end? The ground trembled once more. The growl rose, louder, sharper, and the laughter of the soldiers finally died completely. The battlefield stood still, thousands of eyes fixed on the cage, waiting, dreading, wondering what would step into the light. The alien commanders shouted their orders, their voices cutting through the stillness of the field. Soldiers raised their weapons, their lines tight, their armor shining under the pale light of the sky. Yet even as they prepared, their eyes betrayed them. Many glanced toward the cage at the center of the human camp, unable to ignore the weight pressing down on them. The laughter that had once rolled like thunder across the battlefield was gone now. In its place was a silence heavy enough to smother the air. Every soldier could hear the sound, low, steady, growing louder each time it came. The cage shook with each breath of the creature inside, and with every rumble, the unease spread further down the ranks. At first, it was only the younger soldiers who shifted uncomfortably. They whispered among themselves, voices thin and nervous. "Did you hear that?" one muttered. "What is inside?" another asked. Their commanders silenced them with glares, reminding them that fear was forbidden in the undefeated army. But fear was not so easily crushed. The growl returned, sharper this time, echoing across the plain. Weapons trembled slightly in soldiers' hands. Some gripped them tighter, as though afraid they might drop them. Others turned their eyes toward the ground, unwilling to meet the sight of the cage that was now rattling harder than before. One of the commanders stepped forward, raising his voice so all could hear. "Do not be fooled. It is nothing but a trick. The humans are weak. They bring toys to scare us because they cannot fight us directly." His words were strong, but his tone was strained. Even as he spoke, he too glanced at the cage, his jaw tight, his shoulders stiff. The humans still did not answer. Their silence spoke louder than any words could. They stood in their calm lines, unmoving, unshaken, watching quietly. It was as though they were waiting for the aliens themselves to realize the truth. The soldiers in the undefeated army began to notice something else. The humans did not carry the same fear in their faces. They did not laugh, but neither did they look uneasy. They looked steady, collected, as though what was inside the cage was not a threat to them, but to their enemies. The air grew colder, though no wind blew. The ground seemed heavier beneath their feet. Even the sky felt different, as if it too waited for the moment when the cage would open. A soldier in the front row muttered, too loudly for his commander to ignore, "It doesn't sound like any beast I know." His voice shook, thin and sharp with fear. The commander struck him across the face, shouting for discipline, but the damage was done. Dozens of soldiers around him exchanged nervous glances, their doubts now out in the open. The cage jolted suddenly, chains snapping tight with a loud metallic crack. The sound cut through the army like a blade. Thousands of heads turned, weapons raised, eyes wide. For a heartbeat, it seemed the creature inside would burst free. But the chains held, for now. The growl became a roar, not yet full, but powerful enough to ripple through the air. The sound carried into bones, into hearts, a warning of what was to come. Birds scattered from the mountains, their cries sharp as they vanished into the sky. Even the ground seemed to hum with the echo. The commanders tried once more to rally their forces. They screamed for courage, they shouted of their endless victories, they swore no creature could stand before them. Yet their words felt thin. Their voices could not erase the sound that had sunk into every soldier's mind. The humans remained silent. Their commander lowered his head slightly, his lips moving, speaking only to his own soldiers. Those nearest could just make out the words, carried softly in the heavy air, "It is almost time." And the alien army, for the first time in centuries, realized the truth that none of them wanted to admit. They were afraid. The sky held its breath as the cage rattled again, harder than before. Dust lifted from the ground in thin clouds, drifting through the silent air. The alien soldiers stood frozen, their weapons raised but their courage unsteady. For so long they had marched with pride, certain of their victories, yet now their certainty slipped away like sand between their fingers. Then it came. A sound so deep and violent it seemed to split the very air. A roar, primal and furious, rolled across the battlefield like a storm. It was not the cry of a simple beast. It was something greater, something born not only to kill but to dominate. The sound made hearts race, made hands shake, made even the strongest among them feel suddenly small. The ground trembled beneath their boots. Stones shook loose from the mountains surrounding the plain. The battlefield itself seemed alive with the power of the roar. It wasn't only sound, it was a force, pushing into every soldier, into every bone, reminding them that something inside that cage was no ordinary creature. The front lines faltered. Soldiers stumbled back, eyes wide, struggling to hold their formation. Some lowered their weapons without realizing it, their arms too heavy, their minds too stunned. The alien commanders roared their own orders, desperate to smother the fear with rage. Stand firm. It is nothing but noise. Hold your ground. But their words fell flat. Their voices were drowned out, buried under the echo of the roar that still shook the air. And the humans, they did not move. Not one of them flinched. Not one of them raised a weapon in panic. They stood as though they had expected it all along, their silence more terrifying than the roar itself. Calm, steady, they looked not like soldiers facing a monster, but like masters awaiting their hound. The cage groaned, the chains pulled tight, sparks flying as metal scraped against metal. Another roar erupted, louder this time, so loud it made the sky itself seem to ripple. Flocks of distant creatures fled from the horizon, their cries thin and frantic. The alien soldiers could not stop themselves from looking at the mountains, at the skies, anywhere but the cage, because staring at it made their fear too sharp to bear. Weapons shook in their hands. Some soldiers whispered prayers under their breath, though they had not prayed in years. Others gritted their teeth, trying to force back the terror rising like fire in their chests. But all of them knew the same truth now. This was no trick. This was no machine. The humans had brought something real. One of the commanders tried to laugh, tried to raise his soldiers' courage with his voice. Do not fear. Beasts are nothing against us. We have crushed far worse. But as he shouted, his own eyes betrayed him. They flicked toward the cage, narrowing in doubt, widening in unease. The roar ended, leaving behind an unnatural silence. The battlefield, filled only moments ago with the thunder of drums and the noise of soldiers, now lay still. The only sound was the soft rattle of chains and the slow, heavy breathing from inside the cage. The alien soldiers stood in that silence, their ears ringing, their hearts pounding. They were no longer laughing. They were no longer certain. For the first time, the undefeated army felt the shadow of something they had never known, dread. And then, as if to seal the moment, a human voice carried softly across the still air. Calm, certain, almost gentle. It is time. The silence broke with the scream of tearing metal. The chains snapped one by one, each crack echoing like thunder across the field. The cage shuddered, its steel doors straining against the force inside. Dust rose in a thick cloud, carried on the hot breath of whatever waited within. And then the doors gave way. With a deafening crash, the cage burst open. The sound rolled through the battlefield, a violent thunderclap that silenced even the alien commanders mid-order. For a moment, no one moved. Every eye turned toward the wreckage, toward the shadow stepping into the light. It emerged slowly, each step heavy enough to shake the ground. The beast was massive, towering above soldiers, its form wrapped in thick plates of natural armor that gleamed like dark steel. Scars ran across its body, evidence of battles fought long before this one. Its eyes burned with a red glow, sharp and alive, fixing on the alien army with a predator's focus. Its breath came in deep, rumbling waves, smoke curling from its jaws with every exhale. Muscles shifted under its hide, powerful and coiled, built not for survival alone but for destruction. This was no wild animal. This was something shaped by war itself. The alien warlord, armored in gold and marked with the trophies of countless victories, raised his weapon high. His voice thundered across the field. Attack! The first line of alien soldiers obeyed, rushing forward in perfect formation. Their weapons fired, beams of plasma streaking through the air, explosions flashing against the beast's hide. Smoke and fire swallowed it for an instant, then cleared. It still stood, unharmed. The beast roared, a sound greater than before, and charged. The ground shook with every stride. The first line of soldiers didn't even have time to scream before the beast crashed into them. Armor shattered. Bodies flew. Weapons clattered uselessly as the creature tore through them with terrifying speed. The second line tried to fire, but the beast was already upon them. It moved like a storm, unstoppable, crushing tanks beneath its weight, ripping apart war machines that had once conquered entire planets. Each strike of its claws left devastation. Each swing of its body broke ranks that had never faltered before. The alien soldiers screamed, a sound that had never before touched their army. They had always been the hunters. Now they were prey. From the human camp, the soldiers did not cheer. They did not cry out. They stood in silence, watching as their beast tore through the undefeated. Their calm faces reflected no joy, no hatred, only certainty. This was what they had brought. This was what they had prepared for. The alien warlord roared again, trying to rally his men. His voice cut through the chaos, urging his army to hold their ground, to remember their victories, to remember their pride. But his words were drowned in the chaos, the screams of his soldiers, the sound of tearing metal, and above it all, the endless, furious roar of the beast. The battlefield, once belonging to the undefeated, now belonged to something else. Something far older, far stronger, something that no amount of pride or memory could withstand. And in that moment, as the beast tore through their mightiest machines and crushed their strongest warriors beneath its claws, the alien army began to understand what the humans had brought to the war. They had brought an end. The battlefield was chaos. The air shook with the beast's roar, and the once proud army that had ruled entire sectors found itself broken, scattered like leaves in a storm. Commanders shouted orders, their voices raw with desperation, but their words were swallowed by the terror around them. Soldiers who had once marched without fear now stumbled, dropping their weapons as they ran. The neat lines of their formation dissolved into a frenzy of panic. Some fired wildly into the smoke, bolts of plasma striking their own comrades in their desperation to hit the monster. Others simply fled, trampling each other in their rush to escape the shadow that hunted them. The beast showed no mercy. It moved through the battlefield with terrifying speed, its massive frame tearing through tanks, ripping apart artillery, crushing armored soldiers beneath its claws. Explosions lit the sky as vehicles were hurled aside like toys. Every strike of its limbs sent shockwaves through the earth, toppling those too slow to run. Yet still, the alien commanders roared for resistance. They ordered heavy cannons to fire, rockets to launch, the full weight of their war machines unleashed at once. The battlefield flashed with light as everything they had poured into the beast. The smoke cleared. It was still standing. Burn marks streaked its armored hide, but nothing more. The rockets, the plasma, the energy blasts, all of it had been nothing but sparks against a mountain. The beast shook itself once, like brushing off dust, and roared again, louder than before. That sound broke what little courage remained. Entire squads dropped to their knees, others turned and sprinted away, casting aside weapons that now felt useless. Panic rippled outward like fire, spreading through thousands, until the once mighty army was no longer a disciplined force but a sea of fleeing bodies. Some tried to hide behind their machines, crouching behind the armor of tanks and walkers. The beast tore through them without slowing, ripping steel apart as if it were cloth. Others formed small circles, weapons raised, firing until their barrels overheated. They screamed as the beast fell upon them, their voices cut short in the smoke and blood. From the human side, not a single soldier moved to join the slaughter. They stood quietly, their faces pale in the firelight but calm, almost detached. They did not need to fight. Their war beast was enough. One alien soldier, trembling and clutching a broken weapon, looked across the battlefield at the humans. What struck him hardest was not the monster tearing through his comrades, but the silence of its masters. They watched with steady eyes, as though this was not war but a simple demonstration. As though they had unleashed the beast not out of desperation, but out of choice. The soldier turned and ran, his breath ragged, his thoughts a blur of fear. Around him, thousands did the same. Generals screamed at them, striking down deserters, but even the generals' hands shook as they tried to hold the lines together. The beast did not tire. It did not hesitate. With every moment, more of the undefeated fell, their pride collapsing under the weight of terror. For the first time in living memory, their enemies no longer feared them. They feared the humans. And in that fear, the legend of the undefeated began to crack. The battlefield was no longer a place of war but a graveyard of pride. Smoke rolled across the plains, thick with the stench of burning metal and scorched flesh. The beast moved through it all like a shadow of death, every roar shattering what little order remained. The alien warlord, clad in golden armor and carrying a blade said to have ended 100 battles, stood at the center of the chaos. His soldiers broke around him, scattering into the mountains or falling beneath the claws of the monster, but he refused to move. His eyes burned with rage, with disbelief. His army, the undefeated, the eternal victors, was collapsing before his very eyes. He raised his weapon high and bellowed, his voice carrying above the screams. "Hold the line. Fight. Do not shame our name." His words were desperate, but his pride would not let him yield. He had never retreated. He had never bowed. He would not start now. The beast turned its burning gaze toward him. The ground quaked as it stepped forward, each stride leaving deep scars in the earth. Smoke curled from its jaws. Its eyes locked on the warlord as though the rest of the army no longer mattered. The warlord roared and charged. His soldiers watched with wide eyes, some cheering weakly, clinging to hope that their leader could do what none of them could. His blade glowed as he swung it with all his strength, striking the beast's armored hide. Sparks flew, the ground shook, but the beast did not fall. Instead, it roared in answer, the force of its voice alone staggering the warlord back. He struck again and again, each blow fueled by rage, by desperation, by the weight of 1,000 victories. But the beast endured. Each strike left only shallow marks upon its armor. Then it struck back. One claw swept through the air, smashing against the warlord's chest plate. His golden armor shattered, fragments flying into the smoke. He staggered, blood spilling from beneath the cracks, yet still he tried to raise his weapon. With a defiant scream, he lunged once more. The beast met him head-on. Its roar thundered like the sky itself splitting open. Its massive jaws crashed down, and with one final blow, the warlord was thrown to the ground. The golden armor cracked completely, and the proud general lay broken in the dirt. The sight shattered the last remnants of discipline. Soldiers who had clung to their courage broke instantly, their cries sharp with terror. They turned and fled in every direction, weapons abandoned, banners trampled into the mud. The army that had once ruled the galaxy with iron fists now scattered like frightened children. The beast stood over the fallen warlord, its chest heaving with heavy breaths, its eyes blazing. The battlefield fell into silence once more, no cheers, no laughter, no cries of victory. Only the sound of thousands of boots retreating into the distance, leaving behind the wreckage of their pride. For the first time in centuries, the undefeated had been defeated. And the galaxy would never forget it. The silence after the battle was heavier than the roar of war. Smoke drifted across the ruined plain, carrying with it the ashes of pride and the whispers of fear. The once invincible army was gone, scattered to the winds like dust before a storm. Only the broken banners and shattered weapons remained, marking the place where legends had died. The beast stood in the center of it all, its massive frame outlined by the flickering fires around it. Its claws dripped with blood, its armor dented and scorched, but its spirit unbroken. Every breath it took rumbled through the air like distant thunder. To those who still watched from the shadows, it looked less like a creature of flesh and more like a force of nature, an unstoppable storm given form. From the human lines, a commander stepped forward. He was not a giant, not armored in gold, not draped in the spoils of countless victories. He looked ordinary compared to the galaxy's proud warlords, an officer in worn armor, his face calm and unreadable. But as he walked across the field and placed a steady hand on the beast's scarred hide, every watching eye trembled. Here stood the truth. Humanity was not weak. Humanity did not bow. Humanity brought monsters that could humble empires. The commander's voice carried across the ruins, quiet but sharp as steel. "Let it be known," he said, his eyes fixed on the surviving soldiers who hid among the rocks and hills, "that humanity does not seek war. But if war is brought to us, we will answer. And when we answer, there will be nothing left to challenge us." The beast raised its head and let out a final roar, a sound that echoed for miles, a sound that would carry into every story, every fearful whisper across the stars. It was not only the roar of a creature but the declaration of an entire species. From that day, the galaxy remembered. Not the once invincible army, not the warlord in golden armor. They remembered the Terran war beast, the day it walked onto the battlefield, and the humans who unleashed it. Because that day was not just the fall of an army. It was the rise of a warning. Humanity had arrived.